And welcome to it. Thanks for being with us here on Deck. And today we're taking it back to early October, October 1st, 1996. It's game one of the American League Division Series, Orioles and Indians. Now, this is the first ever playoff game at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. And really, it's the first playoff game for the Orioles since 1983. There have been a lot of buildup, especially with the competitive teams they had when the ballpark first opened. But this Orioles club, remember, this team is below 500 at the trade deadline at the end of July, and then they go on a major run in August and September to win 88 games and win the wild card. But a tough matchup in the division series against the reigning American League champion Cleveland Indians. And boy, were they stacked. We're talking about Albert Bell and Kenny Lofton and Jim Thome and Manny Ramirez. They were loaded, and they would actually win the pennant the following year, but it was not to be in 1996. The matchup in game one, the big left-hander for Baltimore, David Wells against Charles Nagy, who went for the Cleveland Indians. You knew the Orioles had to get off to a hot start at home. The way the series was orchestrated in those days, it was 2 in Baltimore and then 3 on the road at Jacobs Field, as they called it then, in Cleveland, Ohio. So here we go, Orioles and Indians for game one of this division series in front of a almost 48,000 person crowd in downtown Baltimore. A day game, about a 1 o'clock first pitch. The town was buzzing around their ball club, and the Orioles got off to a hot start at the plate with who else but Brady Anderson in 1996.
Line drive, headed for Boob's Barbecue. 1-0 Baltimore. On to Utah Street.
Yeah, Brady delivered early in this game, something we saw throughout the 1996 campaign. B.J. Soroff, who was in his first year as an Oriole, had a couple of big home runs in this game as well. The Orioles, the most powerful team in baseball that year, and really, historically speaking, just a loaded offensive ball club. But it was a close game in this one until Bobby Bonilla stepped to the plate with the bases loaded, and then it happened.
Now it's a full count, 3-2, and they'll all be running. And again, the big crowd, as one rises to its feet. There they go. A high fly ball headed for Utah Street. It's a grand slam. It's 9-3 Baltimore.
That was a Bobby Bonilla grand slam off Paul Shuey in the 6th inning. A dramatic moment at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Baltimore goes on to win the game 10-4, eventually the series, and we'll watch the whole thing coming up here and relive that glorious day at Camden Yards. But I had a chance to catch up with Alan Mills, part of Orioles Magic, the podcast presented by Miller Lite, and we talked about the journey of that 96 ball club. First, as Alan says, they all thought they'd be traded at the deadline.
I got to go back to the point when they had to trade that deadline. Up until that point, we had kind of underachieved. And, back then you didn't have the social media like you have now. And I remember just reading in the paper where, they're going to trade the team away. So basically, most of us had our bags packed. From what I was reading in the paper, I was supposed to be traded to Seattle. So I kind of had my bags packed, and we got to the stadium that day and nobody got traded. So it was kind of weird because we were all kind of, I don't want to say looking forward to, we were just kind of expecting to go elsewhere. And then we didn't. And, I don't know what turned that team around. It was almost like we started playing fantasy football and kind of like our mind just kind of got away from, I guess, all the things that weren't going well. And we just started having fun, man. And next thing you know, we got hot, really hot.
That's former Oriole reliever and current Gulf Coast Oriole manager Alan Mills, who reminisced about a lot of things on Orioles Magic, the podcast, including what happened in the American League Championship Series, Game 1 in Yankee Stadium. You may recall something about a young kid reaching over the fence to take an out away from the Orioles bullpen. We'll get into that with Alan Mills. You can download it anywhere good podcasts are downloaded or at Orioles.com/podcast, Orioles Magic, the podcast. But also Alan Mills got into really the feeling and the nerves and the nervous energy going into that first ever playoff game at Oriole Park at Camden Yards.
we just had fun. We enjoyed it. And I remember the first game at Camden Yards, nobody was saying anything. Nobody. It was almost like the nervous energy. And I remember looking at the guys. I go, man, do you guys feel that? And they're like, what? I said, I'm nervous. I'm really nervous. I said, but there are a ton of teams at home wishing they were here, feeling those nerves, and we kind of loosened up and just went out and played. But all those games, all those series, they were special. And except for that little kid in New York,
And let's go back to October of 1996 with Roch Kubatko of MASNsports.com. Roch, it's great to see you. First of all, how you holding up right now?
Hey, I was able to get a haircut yesterday.
Looks great.
Pretty good, thanks. I mean, Carroll County kind of reopened, so I drove down there because that's where I used to live. And so, yeah, that's actually when my haircut is like the biggest highlight of your basically last 2 months. It's probably time to go back to work.
And you might just get so creative that highlights might be going in that hair next time you go.
Well, it's kind of hard to color your hair right now. That's what my fiance is telling me. I said, buy a box of brown. You'll be fine. She's like, that's not how it works. You don't just buy brown at a store. So don't be any coloring done here.
All right. October of 1996, first ever playoff games at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. The atmosphere against Cleveland, who, by the way, they're the defending American League champs. They won 99 games that year. The Orioles got hot late in the year. They won 88 games. So Cleveland was heavy favorites going in to that series with that loaded team.
They were, and they really were loaded. If you look at them now with Lofton, Tomei, Seitzer, Bell, Franco, Ramirez, Kent, Alomar, Vizquel, I mean, they were absolutely loaded. They were a big favorite. What was interesting, because we're going to make this about me briefly, I was not officially on the beat yet. I was still covering the small colleges. They call them the Baltimore Sun, which means everybody but Maryland. But I was helping with playoff coverage, so I obviously always had to do the other team's clubhouse. And when the Orioles ended up eliminating the Indians, man, it was ugly there. Like, there were players throwing their jerseys in the trash can and knocking things over, and the PR guy scolded a cameraman who was starting to walk in carrying the camera, and the guy said something back to him just saying, oh, I didn't know. And the PR guy goes, this is not a good time. So they were just wrecked by this whole upset loss. But yeah, because the Indians were absolutely loaded and the Orioles jumped them. And what I'm impressed with the Orioles, obviously their lineup, by the way. I mean, Brady, Zeal, Alomar, Raffy, Bobby Bowe, Cal, Eddie, BJ, Hoyles. But their rotation, as you recall, they had the big three, right? They had Mussina, Scott Erickson, David Wells. Who were the other guys in that rotation? Do you remember the names?
Was that Jimmy Haynes this season? Rocky Coppinger.
Jimmy Haynes, Rocky Coppinger, Kent Merker, Rick Krivda. Like, there were three. Arthur Rhodes made a couple starts. I mean, so you had the guys, which in a short playoff series, that's terrific. But it wasn't like the rotation was scaring many people beyond those three. And yet they led the majors in home. They set a major league record for 257 home runs. So they hit the long ball. Pat Gillick was very busy, as you may recall, with all the moves he made. I mean, the offseason, Randy Myers, B.J. Surhoff, Robbie Alomar signed as free agent. He trades for David Wells. He trades for Tony Tarasco, who is probably another segment we'll do sometime on the postseason. And then on August 29th, he trades for Todd Zeal and Pete Incaviglia. So, I mean, he did an outstanding job that year to build that team.
A lot of interest just in that post-game meal with Incaviglia and Wells around. I mean, that is a heavy-hitting group in that in that clubhouse.
And Rocky Coppinger.
Rocky was there. No, but it is an interesting group of characters. And that bullpen, although a lot of those guys came back and had career years in 97, it wasn't that shutdown group in 96. Roger McDowell, actually, the second spitter, as some would say. Yes. McDowell had a great start to the year, but I think he got hurt and then really wasn't able to finish the season. But that bullpen, Davey put that thing together kind of night by night at that point.
Yeah, and you had Rhodes and you had Terry Matthews, who came along later and was the target of fans quite a bit in 97. The guy would get booed before the gates even opened, unfortunately. But, he was a contributor at that time. But, yeah, they really needed that bullpen. It was a pretty deep unit because, again, the rotation beyond those first three, wasn't going to scare anybody. But Gillick did want to trade Bonilla and Wells at one point. He had two separate deals for each of those guys at least. the Pietrangelo nixed because he didn't want to concede the season yet while they were still mathematically alive. Gillick did a great job making deals, and he did a great job not making a couple.
Yeah, Eddie Murray comes back and hits number 500 in September of that year, of course, on the anniversary date of 21-31. And they have this huge run in August and September. And they actually kind of even test the Yankees for the division title for a moment. They really upset Cleveland. And I remember they go 2-0 in Baltimore. I think they lose Game 3 in Cleveland, eventually win the division division series in Cleveland. And then, of course, the Yankees showdown. And I forget what happened in Game 1, but will you remind me, Roch, in 1996 ALCS Game 1, something happened late in that game with Armando Benitez as the pitcher, and Jeter was the hitter, and Tony Tarasco was in right field. What happened again?
All I remember is Richie Garcia blew a call and then was signing autographs for Yankee fans the next day along the first base line. I do remember that, but yes, that whole series turned after that. So
yeah, it's funny you just mentioned
that. Write a book on that season.
We talked to Alan Mills on Orioles Magic, the podcast, and that was his first comment. Not that really Garcia blew the call or any of the other kind of outrageous aspects of it. It was that he saw Richie Garcia signing autographs before Game 2 of that series.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bad look. And you know what's funny? To this day, I'm assuming he's been long retired, but we were covering a spring training game in Clearwater. I think it was last spring. And after the game, you have to wait kind of in a hallway for the manager to come out with the PR guy for the interviews. And Richie Garcia was there. He's like a relative who's an umpire, maybe his nephew or somebody. And Richie Garcia was standing there. And I started to say something. I think it was Dan Connolly goes, "Don't do it, Rocco. Don't do it." But I still wanted to say something to Richie Garcia all these years later about blowing that call. And I finally, for the first time in my life, showed a little bit of restraint.
Amazing. But going back to that division series, just the energy of the ballpark. And, I remember, the vivid recollection actually watching it after school that day, because it was a 1:00 start time, I think, on a Tuesday, Bobby Bonilla's grand slam. And it was a majestic blast. And that was kind of the nail in the coffin that day.
It was typical of the Orioles, a team that hit 257 home runs, how important the home run was that game. I think Brady had a leadoff homer. It just started out. You had the Bonilla grand slam, B.J. Surhoff homer twice, I believe. Tie-breaking home run, and then he hit one again in the seventh inning. They beat up on Paul Shuey, who would finish his career with the Orioles. A lot of guys have finished their careers with the Orioles. I think Shuey pitched in that 30-2 game, and they stretched him out much longer than he ever gone in his career. And he made like one more appearance, blew out his arm, and he was done. So the Orioles take credit for ruining Paul Shuey's career at that point. But the Orioles had such a big game. And again, it was the long ball. They just lived and died by that home run. You also remember, though, with that season and the postseason, this was also the Robbie Alomar spitting incident season. And obviously he was a villain everywhere he went. And that final game, the Game 4, he's the one that had the tie-breaking or tying single in the ninth inning to send the game into extras and homer in the 12th inning, and they ended up winning. So that was a big story in itself. The Robbie Alomar, who's being booed everywhere, ended up being a hero in Game 4 to clinch that series.
And listen, he was such an incredible player. Really at his apex, at that moment, such a big free agent signing. And if I recall, the umpires were livid he was allowed to play in the postseason. And he was suspended for the first 5 games of the next season for a team that, was expected to win 90-plus games. It was the first 5 games of the year. And if I recall correctly, there was almost like a walkout strike from the umpires for him to even play.
Right. And honestly, I think I could say he's probably the most talented overall player that I've ever covered. And obviously, I didn't cover Frank. But Robbie could beat you in so many different ways, and teammates always marvel at that. He could hit a big home run. It could be a single or an extra base hit. It could be with his speed. It could be with his defense. He was probably the best defensive player I ever saw. So he might be overall the most talented player I covered. I still question whether it should be in the team's Hall of Fame because he was only here 3 years, and his last year, 98, he won it out badly.
Here's an oddity, and we'll end on this, Roch. Charles Nagy starts first game ever at Camden Yards in 1992, and he starts the first playoff game for Cleveland, first playoff game at Camden Yards in 1996. So,
which would be a great trivia question, or it would have been. We just gave away the answer. But it really is interesting. A lot of people forget who was opposing Rick Sutcliffe. We all remember who started for the Orioles that day. Nagy had a pretty good career. He was a pretty good pitcher. And I don't think the Indians necessarily were known for their dominant rotations.
No.
Those years, even though
It was
they
El
were
Presidente and Oral
too.
Hershiser. It was guys like that,
Right.
at the
Chad
end of their
O'Day.
career. Yep.
Yeah. Guys
Now, when
like
Albert
that who
Bell,
were not dominant.
when Albert Bell came here a few years later, what was your relationship like with Big Albert?
Probably like everybody else's for the most part. Once the season started, you really have one with him. You had to be smart enough to know what you should do and not do, and not antagonize him. And I mean by antagonize him, I mean by walking in front of his locker. You just had to know to take a wide circle around him and leave him alone. He would be friendly. I saw the Fan Fest one year, and I wanted to ask him about how the hip was doing. And he said hi to me, invited me to sit down for the interview. And when you'd see him at spring training, the early days, he'd say hi to us when we were in the media workroom. And then toward the end of spring training, you might get a head nod, maybe. And by the time the regular season started, he would have nothing to do with you. It's like this guy had multiple personalities. And then by the off season, he was a friendly guy again. And he probably would be fine now if I saw him. But he was just just when the season started, he just felt like the media was the enemy and you were in his way and you were distracted from what he was trying to do. Remember, he had the 3 home run game at Camden Yards, and then for the first time ended his media silence just so he could call Joe Strauss a liar in the press dining room. They held it there. We were like, I think it was Steve Molesky said, "Why did you choose to talk to us today?" He glared at him and said, "Like, because I wanted to." But it was basically just to call the Sun beat writer a liar. That was Albert.
And Albert, by the way, hit a big grand slam in that 96 ALDS, I believe against Benitez, I believe.
Yes.
Someone will correct the record on that. Game 3 in Cleveland. All right, Roch, always a pleasure. Stay healthy and well, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks. All right, you too.
Great stuff there with Roch Kubatko, reminiscing about the Orioles in the middle 90s, we'll call it. And don't forget to check out Melanie Newman's show on Orioles Instagram called The Grind, presented by Duncan. Melanie's having a lot of fun talking to Orioles currently about life right now, about baseball. It's The Grind on Orioles Instagram, 11 a.m. on Wednesdays. And don't forget to check out on Thursdays, Birdland Playback streams back historical Orioles games on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Orioles.com. Every Thursday, relive the best moments in Orioles history and discuss with your fellow Orioles fans on social media all those great magical moments. Visit Orioles.com/tune-in for more of the upcoming streaming schedule. And good news, folks, that's what we're doing right now. Without further ado, let's go back to October 1st, 1996, a beautiful day in downtown Baltimore. It was a weekday. It was the first ever playoff game at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. We're all waiting for it. The Orioles, the wild card winners against the Cleveland Indians, game 1 of that division series, and it was rocking in downtown Baltimore. Enjoy it.